Lining this sidewalk on any given night, people from different parts of the world who want nothing more than a life in America. I came to register at immigration, says this man from Guinea, West Africa. He's been in New York City for only 2 weeks, he says, telling us after traveling through several countries guided by the human smugglers he paid, he crossed the border illegally from Mexico into the United States. Here, he hopes to be granted asylum. He says poverty, danger, and social unrest in his country forced him out. He was in fear of losing my life in Africa, he says. We met him on a Sunday night in November in a sea of migrants and asylum seekers, all of them outside the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office in Lower Manhattan, where we've learned that even with an appointment, being seen is not guaranteed. This line is always here, says this asylum seeker from Ecuador, telling us it's well known in the migrant community that the demand on the New York City ICE office exceeds the number of people that can be seen daily. About 500 people go in daily. That's why there's this line. Not everyone can enter, he says. So no matter the weather, they wait and sleep outside in an attempt to ensure they will get into the ICE office in the morning. This line along the sidewalk is indicative of just how many migrants and asylum seekers are in New York City and what they're willing to endure. In this line, there doesn't exist a bathroom, he says. No bathrooms, and for many of them, no familiar faces.
Are you family, friends?
No. Okay. We are strangers.
Strangers who have learned to find a piece of home even though it might as well be a world away.
Where are you guys from?
We are from China.
You're all from China?
Yeah.
In the loneliest times, somebody who speaks your language can be just as good as someone you know.
We all want to stay in America.
You need to go to immigration tomorrow?
Yeah.
ICE there.
You have to go to ICE?
Yeah.
These asylum seekers from India tell me the life they left behind
India is dangerous.
is much more complicated than their main challenge on this night.
Cold.
Cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, cold.
You're feeling cold?
Yeah.
Blankets and cardboard boxes provide some relief from the cold overnight, but clearly this is far from ideal.
You can see they're doing what they can to keep warm, and if you take a closer look, you'll notice they're doing what they can to comfort one another, and that's whether they know each other or not.
From sharing food to engaging in a little conversation, they all know all too well how stressful waiting can be. When your future is uncertain, you learn to appreciate even the smallest comforts. That's the reality that inspires Glenda Montes to come out here every night. With the help of a relative, she sells cups of coffee for $2, she says. Originally from Colombia, she tells us she's been in New York City for about 5 months. The idea to sell coffee came after waiting on this very sidewalk for the very same reason as the others. My husband and I got the idea to sell the coffee, she says, telling us they escaped Colombia with their 2 daughters. Like countless other asylum seekers, they left, looking for a better life, for the future of our children, she says. Refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants leave their countries for different reasons, but for many, it's because they are in fear. Crime, war, extreme poverty, social injustice, and political or religious oppression are some of the reasons they decide to leave their homes. In order to be granted asylum in the United States, a person must prove credible fear of persecution or torture. There's many stories of different people coming in different ways. Different stories of the journey, she says. It's well known that journey into the United States is dangerous. Many lose their lives while illegally crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. For those who make it, there is often a long road ahead. Settling in a new country is far from easy, especially without a support system. I want to return home, this woman says. I don't have anyone to help me with my daughter, she tells us right after she tucked her daughter in where only blankets provide a barrier from the pavement. Clearly defeated, she didn't expect to turn around after making the illegal journey into the U.S. from Ecuador.
Con los coyotes.
With coyotes, yes, she says. Coyotes is a term used to refer to those who smuggle humans into the United States. Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI, targets and investigates all links in the human smuggling chain, including overseas recruiters and organizers. But look no further than the sidewalk here to see the enforcement isn't working well enough. The federal government is aware of the backlog at the New York City ICE office. In a statement, a spokesperson said U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement continues efforts to address processing delays. We've confirmed after crossing the southwest border, non-citizens, including asylum seekers, are told to schedule an appointment within 60 days at the ICE office where they reside. Also, in the statement from ICE, we were told the New York City office has capacity to see approximately 600 non-citizens a day on average, depending on the complexity of each case. Over the course of several weeks, we came to the area several times. We talked to people on and off camera, not just in the dark, but also under daylight. On this Friday morning in November, we found a lot of people eager and ready for the doors to open. The ICE office operates Monday to Friday, starting at 8 a.m. I passed the whole night here, says this man from a country in Africa.
Oh, blankets?
Blanket.
With a blanket in that plastic bag and immigration paperwork in that file folder, he and a few others with him were waiting to get in.
No.
But on this day, by 9:30 in the morning, it's closed, says this man from Ecuador, clearly disappointed. A man here told me a security guard said, come on Monday at 3 a.m., this man from Cuba tells us. As federal employees who work at the location handed out information, a paper which explains in several languages what to do next, we watched a range of emotions in the crowd, from angst to confusion to downright sadness. It's not easy, says this man from Venezuela, clearly at a breaking point. I left the country thinking everything is easy, but the situation is not how one thinks of it. You are by yourself here. On the sidewalk outside the New York City ICE office in Lower Manhattan, week after week, month after month, as the city's migrant crisis lingers with no end in sight, there are so many voices, faces, people who prove the complexities of immigration are far beyond numbers, policies, and resources. They are the migrants in America who, in their own words, can explain just how challenging it all is on a human level. Stephanie Bertini, Fox 5 News. This young family calls the Row Hotel home for now. 53, he says, explaining how many days they have left until they have to leave. A little worried, he tells us, as he thinks about all the uncertainty they're facing. But as he thinks about the long term, all you see is hope. My future, good things for my children, stability and tranquility, he says. The children, 6 and 3 years old, were with him and his wife as they left Venezuela, a nation in the midst of a humanitarian crisis, and made the illegal journey into the United States. I got out of Venezuela from Colombia, he says, telling us they went through 8 countries before crossing the U.S.-Mexico border into Texas. Touching American soil was the goal, he explains, but the destination was always New York City, where they arrived in a bus, like so many other asylum seekers. New York, I will explain it to you. Us immigrants, many of us, we come here for stability for our children. Here, we hear they will help us. City officials say almost 150,000 asylum seekers have come to New York City seeking shelter since last spring. Each week, the number goes up as the city is in the midst of a migrant crisis. Resources are at capacity. The Row Hotel is one of more than 200 emergency shelters established by New York City for migrants. But the demand is so great, restrictions are now in effect, putting limits on shelter stays. We met this family shortly after they were given a 60-day notice to vacate after living in the hotel for months. It's a little stressful, he says. It is faith, determination, and the push for a better life that fuels migrants and asylum seekers to fight for what so many of them explain in one short phrase. The American dream, he says. But now that he's here, he tells us he understands how complicated that American dream can be. I am waiting for the work papers, he says. Immigration matters take time. The family has applied for asylum like many Venezuelans do. Right now, they're waiting on a decision from the federal government that will determine the rest of their lives. In Venezuela, poverty, corruption, and danger is reality. When you have 2 young children, it feels like a death sentence, he says. I think in America, the stability, it's very tranquil. Tranquility and stability is worth everything when you're from a society that's in the midst of a humanitarian crisis. So even though they can't work and don't know where they will be living when the 60 days is up, for them, this is worth it. The situation we are going through, he says, it's all for his boys to have the kind of childhood he never knew, in a country where they can grow up to be whatever they have the potential to be. Stephanie Bertini, Fox 5 News. Hard at work on the streets of Manhattan. Dennis Rico sells homemade arepas and other authentic Venezuelan dishes. He starts his day at 7 a.m., cooking for hours. I am preparing in a kitchen that a friend rented who has like 8 years in this city, he says, and then he heads out. I leave with my little cart like you see here to sell. He says he sells long after sunset. Per day, it's like $100 or $120, he says, telling us the cash money is much better than nothing. It's practical because I don't have legal documents, he says, referring to work papers. He came to America with his wife and daughter in pursuit of a better life. They left Venezuela and, like many others, are seeking asylum in the United States. Their decision to leave was based on survival. It's a reality that's very hard and complicated. An economic situation that is brutal, catastrophic, he says, as he describes the life he left behind in a nation that has long been plagued with poverty, political turmoil, and other dangers. It hurts me a lot to be out of Venezuela, he admits. But instead of focusing on how that feels, he chooses to wear a smile and sell the food he loves. Many of his customers, he says, are other migrants who embrace the taste of home. Other migrants that are Venezuelan that are in the area, he says. Right now, Denise lives in one of the more than 200 emergency shelters the city has established during the migrant crisis that started last spring. A migrant's life is very hard, he says, as he reflects on all the uncertainty settling in America after crossing the border illegally brings. An experience, honestly, that is very hard, but it makes you reflect, he says, as he holds on to the hope that things will be so much better in the long run. For my future, I am not worried, because if you are constructing it by yourself, your future will be progressive and good. It will be guaranteed. As officials contend with an overload of migrants and asylum seekers in New York City, resources are running thin. He knows the help he's getting for now, with shelter, for example, will eventually run out. And by now, he's realized how expensive and tough New York City can be. I feel worried, but there's no point in being worried, he says. And so he's focused on his version of the American dream here in New York City, using the food that reminds him of home to build a bridge into the future he's fighting for. And in the future, he says he hopes to have an arepa store. Stephanie Bertini, Fox 5 News. After crossing the southern border illegally, Gabriel Diaz, his wife, and their son made their way to New York City. I knew people here that could help me, he says, referring to others who, like him, are claiming asylum in the United States. Similar to countless others, his motivation was in pursuit of a better life. Now the tough reality is setting in. It's hard because I don't have the papers of permission to work, he says. For now, Diaz lives in a Manhattan hotel, now one of the more than 200 emergency shelters the city is using to house migrants. But life in New York City, even with a roof over your head, is nearly impossible without any money. He's working under the table, he says.
Por cash.
Sí.
For cash, yes, he says. He gets paid cash to deliver food. He works long hours for little money. Under federal law, after filing an asylum claim, migrants must wait 6 months before attempting to work legally.
Eso es muy preocupante.
This is very worrisome, says Diaz, as he tries to figure out how to provide for his family long term.
Es duro, pero es más.
It's hard, but it's harder in my country, he says. He left Venezuela, a nation which for years has been plunged in a political, economic, and humanitarian crisis. He says poverty and danger forced his family to run away. Asylum seekers in the United States fear persecution due to things like politics, religion, and race, for example. The city says resources are at capacity. To date, around 140,000 migrants and asylum seekers have come to New York City since last spring, looking for shelter while they wait for their immigration cases to be finalized. In a recent statement to Fox 5 News, a spokesperson for the mayor said, time and time again, Mayor Adams has warned that we are past our breaking point. We have run out of space to accommodate migrants without limits. Now, the city is doing what it can to funnel migrants out of the emergency shelter system, recently establishing a ticketing center to get those willing to leave a plane ticket, and imposing limits on shelter stays. It's currently a 60-day limit for families. Diaz sees the writing on the wall.
Mucho que se van a quedar.
A lot of people in the streets are like me. They don't have a way, he says. For Diaz, thinking about the future is becoming increasingly stressful.
Yo nunca había
I never wanted to leave my country. Never, he says, fighting back tears.
Yo extraño a mi familia.
I miss my family a lot, he says. His words offering a window into the emotional burden migrants may carry. Proof that the reality of trying to settle in America after crossing the border illegally is tough for various reasons.
Porque todo lo que hemos pasado.
Everything we went through to come here, and here it's difficult and a bit complicated, he says. Stephanie Bertini, Fox 5 News. He's worried about the future.
I don't want to end up like a lot of homeless people.
We found this man standing outside the Roosevelt Hotel with his belongings on the sidewalk. It's a familiar place he first went to when he arrived to New York City as one of the more than 100,000 migrants and asylum seekers who have come looking for refuge since last spring. The Roosevelt is the arrival center for migrants and asylum seekers during what the city has called an ongoing crisis.
The Roosevelt sent us to a shelter in Brooklyn, and we stayed there like for almost 3 months. They moved us in another shelter and made us to sign a letter that they're gonna literally kick us out in 60 days.
And you got kicked out?
Yes, tonight, fortunately.
With resources at capacity, the city started imposing limitations on shelter stays for migrants. Initially 60 days, and as the crisis progressed, now it's 30 days for singles and 60 days for families.
And I know the situation. I know that it's tough. Literally, like in New York City, is like dealing with a lot of stuff, but it's also difficult because we're struggling over here.
The reality of these restrictions is difficult for someone in his shoes.
Why did you come to America?
I come to America like everyone, pretty much like an asylum seeker because of the facts in my country, and like everything there is terrible.
Where are you from?
I'm from a country in Africa.
Following the lead of countless others, he crossed the U.S.-Mexico border into the United States in pursuit of a better life.
I crossed the border by smuggling, like pretty much like every single person here.
He paid those human smugglers everything he had and more.
Every single penny, everything. Actually, you had to borrow some money from others, from like my relatives. We suffered over there a lot.
As a single young man in his 20s, he was willing to risk it all for freedom.
To save myself from those monsters in my country, basically.
He traveled through several continents and countries.
Africa, Turkey, South America, and then to America, like Mexico, yeah.
He knew then, and even more so now, how dangerous the illegal journey into the United States is. The federal government has long documented that many die trying to do what he did. Now he's reflecting.
Does this feel like it's better?
Here, Not for the moment.
In a recent statement to Fox 5 News, a spokesperson for the mayor said New York City is far past its breaking point. For months, Mayor Adams has warned that without substantive help from our state and federal partners, this crisis could begin to play out on city streets. Humanitarians are concerned about migrants being added to the homeless population. He and others like him are too, as they contend with what being displaced truly feels like.
We're literally like squeezed like tiny sandwiches. Thank you, New York, for treating us like sandwiches.
This is video inside the shelter where he finds himself now. It's dark, but you can see they are all on the floor. Under federal law, asylum seekers are protected from deportation but can't legally work for 6 months. His pockets are empty.
Looking for like jobs under the table or anything that I can like earn a little bit of money.
As if his living situation isn't humbling enough.
What did you do back home?
I used to be an English teacher.
When we asked him why he's sharing his story but not showing his face,
Don't want like anything that's gonna affect my case in the future, because I told you I'm an asylum seeker.
just imagine how difficult his old life was. That's the only way to make sense of why he would leave everything behind, including, he tells us, his sick mother for this.
Extremely horrible, frankly speaking.
Horrible, but still he hopes it will pay off.
Waiting for the American dream, like waiting for them to save me.
Stephanie Bertini, Fox 5 News. Among the asylum seekers living in one of New York City's hotels now being used as a shelter, this woman and her children.
Bueno, ahorita la preocupación es que tenemos que salirnos de los hoteles.
The worry is we have to leave the hotel, she says. She asked us not to show her face, explaining she's afraid of being exposed. She's more comfortable living in the shadows because of her immigration status. Fear is something she's learned to live with since she left her home and made the dangerous illegal journey to the United States.
Porque no puedo trabajar, no puedo hacer nada por los 4 niños, todo se me ha complicado.
I can't work, I can't do anything for the 4 children. It's complicated, she says. Like every mother, she wants the best for her kids, and that was her motivation to leave her country, a nation in South America where people contend with poverty, political oppression, and other dangers. The quest for a better life, the fight for the American dream, it's the story of countless migrants who are willing to take big risks. This mother paid a human smuggler. She says they traveled through dangerous terrain and crossed several countries, including Colombia, Panama, and Ecuador. Eventually, they crossed the U.S.-Mexico border.
Vimos muchos muertos.
We saw many dead people, she says, telling us one of her children almost drowned and her oldest got lost. He was separated from the family for a few hours.
Hay muchas cosas feas.
A lot of ugly things, people dying of hunger, he says. Clearly, he's already seen the worst life can offer. The illegal journey into the United States proves deadly for many. U.S. Customs and Border Protection has long documented the dangers. When non-citizens cross the border unlawfully, they put their lives in peril. But migrants continue to pour across the border and make their way to New York City, a sanctuary city dealing with a huge overflow that has become a humanitarian crisis. The demand for shelter so overwhelming, officials are now enforcing new measures like time limits, 30 days for singles and 60 days for families.
Y en verdad no sabemos qué vamos a hacer, pues.
And then we don't know where we will go, she says. She's on the edge waiting for more information after seeing this posted in the halls of the hotel where she and her children are staying. It's written in several languages, including English, and says in part, Mayor Eric Adams announced a new rule that impacts all families with children staying at this location. Site staff will provide you with information about when your last day at this location will be. The city says families with nowhere to go can resubmit for assistance, but officials also keep saying resources are at capacity. The information can be overwhelming when you don't know the language or have a support system.
Me siento sola porque no tengo ningún.
I feel alone because I don't have family here, she says. The single mother was told by other migrants that New York City is the place to go to find that better life. Now, as she faces the reality and the pressure of having to do it on her own here, she wonders if she made the right choice.
No me quiero quedar en la calle con los niños.
I don't want to be on the street with the children, she says. Stephanie Bertini, Fox 5 News.